Chicago Bears mock draft madness. I've seen so many mock drafts this offseason, but most of them have been completely thrown out of the window by the moves Ryan Poles has made in the last 72 hours. The Bears have added 5 new starters in the trenches, and it really changes what we can do in this year's draft. I don't do a lot of mock drafts on this channel, but this video is for the people who like mock drafts. I'm going to take you through a couple of different scenarios and walk you through our options in this year's draft after the Bears have spent hundreds of millions of dollars in free agency. There are a few different mock draft simulators out there, and honestly, all of them have their pluses and minuses. I don't take mocks too seriously because I don't really trust many of the big boards they have, but I am going to show you one that I ran through on each of these simulators, one on PFN's mock, one on Mock Draft Database's mock, and one from PFF. Let's go ahead and get right into it. On PFN, I was able to land Mykel Williams at pick 10, giving us an instant upgrade at defensive end, someone who could come in and eventually take over for DOO. In the second round, I landed Kenneth Grant, a monster defensive tackle who, when paired with Gervon Dexter and Grady Jarrett, would give the Bears one of the best defensive lines in the NFL. 2 picks later, I was able to add former Virginia tackle Wyatt Milam and then Caleb Johnson in round 3. I thought this draft was really solid. Caleb Johnson's one of my favorite runners in the class, and I got a couple sleepers late as well. On my MDDB mock, I landed James Pierce Jr. in the first round. Again, going with the defensive end. In round 2, I was able to add a guy who would come in and play right guard. He would compete with Jonah Jackson. It's Donovan Jackson from Ohio State. But I stayed at Ohio State for 3 straight picks, also adding Tyleik Williams at defensive tackle and Quinshawn Judkins at running back. I did trade down 3 spots and add a 4th-round pick in this one as well. On my PFF mock, again, another pass rusher in the first round. This time I went with Mike Green out of Marshall, but was able to land 2 steals in the second round. Tyler Booker, the guard from Alabama, and Nick Amanawari, the safety from South Carolina, while still picking up Caleb Johnson. These are a couple variations of what can happen if the Bears take a pass rusher in the first round. You still have a lot of options going forward in the draft. But let's go ahead and take a look at a live mock draft here. I am using PFF because I do believe they have the best trade system. These are the settings I'm using going in favor of the PFF board, and we're going full 7 rounds. Starting off the draft here, we'll see how the first 9 picks go. And as you can see, nothing crazy really happened here, but Ashton Jeanty did go number 2 overall to the Browns. Whew. As you can see, no one really jumps off the board to you here. Malachi Starks could come in and instantly start at safety. Jahad Campbell could come in and maybe even end up replacing Tremaine Edmonds. Armand Membu could come in and challenge for right guard. He's honestly a guy I would lean towards here, and I wouldn't rule out Membu if he's still on the board. He's a guy who played right tackle in college, but he can come in and start at right guard or at least challenge Jonah Jackson. So Membu is definitely a guy that's on the table here. And then James Pierce Jr., another guy that I think really is going to be in consideration with this pick. But then you got to go down the board a little bit to see the next guys I think the Bears would consider taking. I think this is a little bit too high for Donovan Izaraku. I do think Kenneth Grant, this is a guy who should be in consideration. Josh Simmons is a sleeper. And Kelvin Banks, I'm not sure what to expect from him. But PFF's board does have 2 players ranked way too low here. I do think Mykel Williams is in the conversation to be picked at pick 10, and I think Jalen Walker is as well. This is a guy who could even go before we pick. He's been heavily mocked to the Panthers at pick 8. No way is he going to go this low. But Mykel Williams is definitely in consideration here. But with this much talent on the board, I would consider a trade back. And my favorite thing about the PFF mocks is they give you different trade options every time. My options for a trade with this one would be to go back to pick 16, pick 35, or pick 38. I would only be willing to go back to pick 16 with the Cardinals. And it's pretty easy to work out a trade here. We'll go pick 16, pick up a 3rd-round pick, and that's going to be an easy trade. Now, I could try to go for the 2nd-round pick. 70% chance, but I want to be realistic. We could easily pick up a third rounder by moving down a few spots, and this makes a ton of sense for us. So I'm going to pull this trade off, move down to pick 16. See how the board falls here? We lost Malachi Starks, there went Mimbu, and then there went James Pierce Jr. But we still have a chance here at grabbing, but we can still grab a quality edge rusher like Michael Williams, Shamar Stewart, or we could pivot and go defensive tackle like Kenneth Grant, who I would really love at this pick as well. Or you can try to get the left tackle of the future with either Josh Simmons or Kelvin Banks Jr. I'm going to take our biggest need off the board and grab the guy that I think's the best edge rusher here. I'm taking Michael Williams. Heading into the second round, you see one of my favorite guys that I would love to take at this pick, Tyleik Williams, just went off the board. We added an edge rusher in the first, so when looking here, I'm not really going to want to grab an edge rusher. Colston Loveland is a guy who probably shouldn't be on the board. That would be a best player available pick. I really like Nick Amanawari. If this guy is still on the board at pick 39 and 41, we have to potentially consider taking him as our safety of the future. He's one of the best safety prospects in the entire draft. I love him. But scrolling down a little bit, you can see there's just a couple guys on the board here that I think if they're still on the board in the second round, they make a ton of sense. Now, Tyleik Williams would have been one of those guys. He just went. Princely Umana is another one, but since I went edge in the first round, he doesn't make sense here. I would be eyeing Tyler Booker here and Nick Amanawari. I'm going to go ahead. I'm going to try to take Booker first and hope the safety falls. If the safety doesn't fall, I can then pivot. Oh, wow. And then we had a huge surprise here. The Saints actually went with a safety, but they took Xavier Watts, who I really like. But then that would leave the Bears with a decision here. Do you take Colston Loveland at tight end, or do you take Nick Amanawari at safety? I'm going to go with Amanawari here. Boom. And let's check out our picks after 3 rounds now. I've locked up a solid edge rusher in Michael Williams. I've grabbed a guard who can come in and be our right guard of the future or end up being the heir apparent to Joe Tooney in a couple years and got us a safety prospect that I believe is a first-round talent, while also adding an additional third-round pick by trading down. Then we can go back to the board here and see the last few guys taken before us. Donovan Jackson just went off the board. I would have loved to pick him here. Ariante Ursary would have been a good pick. So would have Jordan Birch. But let's see what we have on the board now. Ozzy Trapilo, that's an interesting tackle prospect. I'm not a huge fan of Cameron Williams, who I think is just a right tackle prospect, so I'm going to leave him out. Travion Henderson would make a ton of sense here. But I'm going to scroll down just a little bit more and keep looking around. RJ Harvey makes sense. So does Joshua Farmer. And I think Terrence Ferguson would make a ton of sense here as well. But I'm going to go with the running back. I think Travion Henderson at this point, he fits the mold of a Jahmyr Gibbs type. And I think this could be a Ben Johnson pick right here. And then the board fell perfectly here, leaving both Ozzy Trapilo and Terrence Ferguson on the board. I think the Bears would have a tough decision here. Do you bring in another left tackle prospect to potentially compete with Braxton Jones and Karan Amagaji going forward? Or do you get another solid tight end, a guy who can be tight end 2 and a receiving option in Terrence Ferguson? This one would be tough. I think both of these guys would be great picks here. I'm going to go ahead and go in favor of the trenches. After seeing what Dan Moore got paid in free agency yesterday, we need to make sure we have a left tackle option next season. And while I am a big fan of Karan Amagaji, I would like to add some competition and have another option as well. Give me Ozzy Trapilo. Terrence Ferguson went with the next pick, and now you're just kind of looking at the board for best available player. We've already taken a running back, so I'm not really looking for one here. Both of these tight ends here make sense. I like Pat Bryant a lot. I also really like Kyle Williams. At this point, you're kind of looking around. It's best player available. Seth McLaughlin's available. That could give you a guy who could compete for center of the future in a couple of years. But I'm adding Kyle Williams, the receiver out of Washington State. I'm a big fan of this dude. Go ahead and lock it in. And then we're at round 7. These are just going to be sleeper guys. You just kind of want to scroll down the board and see if anybody really sticks out. I do like Smile Munden Jr. Montrell Johnson's fun. Clay Webb at this point would be a great pick, and the Bears actually worked out Kane Madrano. And then Joshua Gray is a prospect the Bears have shown a lot of interest in. Keep an eye on this guy. I'm going to go with Kane Madrano, though. Give me the speedy linebacker who can be a special teams guy with some upside in round 7. That leads us one more pick here, and then I would be choosing between an offensive line developmental prospect. Give me either Clay Webb or Joshua Gray. Both of them had good weeks this year during the bowl season. Clay Webb was at the Senior Bowl, Josh Gray was at the Shrine Bowl. I'm going to go ahead and take Josh Gray here and wrap up this draft, what I think was a really solid draft for the Chicago Bears. If it ends up going like this in April, I will be very happy. I don't like to do any crazy trade downs here, so we just traded down 6 picks and picked up a third rounder. And if the Bears could pull something like that off this offseason, I think it would be huge. We don't really need any extra picks, but I think if we can add an extra pick somewhere between rounds 2 and 4, it would be perfect for this year's draft. And then I added an edge rusher who would come in and be our future starter across from Montez Sweat, Michael Williams, Tyler Booker, a guy with a ton of upside, Nick Amanawore, who you pair him with Jaquan Brisker, and suddenly our secondary is even more athletic than it is now. Overall, I really like this draft, and it's just showing some potential options and one route we could go this offseason. Let me know if you guys were a fan of this one or what you would have done differently. Stay tuned because I have a ton more content on the way. And until next time, bear down.